The danger is that if this set of circumstances prevail, despondency sets in. People lose hope. The temptation of people to then assume the law in their own hand becomes present in our social fabric, which is something we must guard against as a country very jealously. So that is what I would caution every Kenyan who is evaluating this situation to be careful about. That if a situation happens, this situation deserves redress from the law. The law does not supply any credible answer to that situation. The temptation or the danger of a justice gap setting in and people becoming falling into hopelessness is present. The far-reaching consequences of that sort of hopelessness are things that we can't even imagine. We have every reason in the country to reflect, to ask ourselves, why did we get it all wrong in these circumstances that we have not answered the ever-present, the ever-living concerns of the victims of these crimes?
Thanks for that, because that was indeed my question. We have not made attempts, at pursuing some of the others that were responsible, because we understand the mandate of the ICC, but there's also a responsibility to have that done locally. And so far, that is rather disheartening in that sense, yet we're still asking for withdrawal from the ICC, Danston?
What I think is that the victims know exactly which neighbor stole their cow, which neighbor raped them, which neighbor touched their houses. There is no limitation to criminal law. You cannot say that because it was 2007, now it can't be investigated. My view is Kenya has failed. We have failed to set local systems. The criminal courts in this country have jurisdiction to deal with those matters. If we now come back and say, let us collect evidence, I believe now the police force is reformed or is in the process of being reformed to be responsive to the needs of the citizens.
Yes, Danston, the police service has been reformed, in fact, from a force to a service.
Yes.
But the level of evidence that they gave to the DPP was insufficient, even after being reformed. So with that being in mind, do we then have the moral authority to say the ICC has failed and let's pull out when we ourselves have not done the same?
In our view, and that's what my view is that the judiciary should be reformed properly. The police, the organs of investigation should be reformed properly to address those issues. Because right now, as we are talking, there are people who are not on their lands, and yet there are people farming on those lands. Do we really need the ICC to resolve that matter? Do we need to have IDPs in our camps? I don't think that is the solution. In my own view, as much as we are intending to use the international criminal justice to get solutions to our local problems, we need to reactivate our own internal mechanisms to make sure that there is a restorative justice.
Okay.
My colleague is making what, with greatest respect, is an oxymoronic argument. On the one hand, he says our systems have failed. On the other hand, he's saying we can't have ICC. It's not possible to have that argument in one closet, because the Director of Public Prosecutions addressing a meeting, I think, of the National Justice, there is an organ that the Chief Justice of the Judiciary, the justice system is involved.
The Administrative of Justice.
He said he had closed 5,000 files.
Yes.
Closed, not resubmitted, not asked for a resubmission.
Further investigations.
Not further investigations. He had closed them because there was no evidence.
Yeah.
Now, if you have closed these files, true, criminal cases don't get closed until they have been prosecuted successfully or somehow finished. But that is the point. He closed those files because there was no evidence. Two, isn't that the evidence you need to show that either Kenya is unable, unwilling, or incapable of bringing those people who were responsible for post-election violence into account, so that the ICC then becomes the next step, the next level of accountability.
All right.
In any event, I wanted to say this.
Yeah.
It is not about the reform of the police service or the reform of the judiciary. In fact, when you talk about the reform of the judiciary, you are trivializing the question further, because the judiciary, if a judge was independent, a magistrate was independent and objective, that magistrate, she does not go to say, give me this evidence or that evidence. They'll wait for the evidence that is brought by the police, the investigator. If the investigator brings incompetent evidence, they will obviously acquit.
Okay.
Even those who are guilty.
Very quick final thoughts. If you think the ICC does not provide justice, why then does Uganda then refer Dominic Ongwen to the ICC and give him up this year in January and not choose to deal with the issue of Ongwen locally?
Well, there was a mysterious perception that the ICC was there to do justice for the Ugandans. Remember very well, President Museveni has been very, very critical of the ICC.
And yet he handed over Ongwen.
He sends his own guys.
Right.
That is a double speak. And that, is it an African way of dealing with issues? Let this guy go there. So long as I don't deal with him, I do not have.
But that is a
those
position
answers.
that's been taken by the AU.
So the question that is there now, Yvonne, is so simple. The evidence produced and given to the ICC is not sufficient. All my prayer is the office of the OTP failed to do its job very well. Just the same way.
So do you think the ICC should be intervening in African matters?
The ICC should intervene in all matters in the whole world, not only selectively in Africa.
So then African countries should not then be referring those cases if they feel that the ICC is unfairly targeting African nations, right? Because Charles Taylor went, Bagbo went, and all of these are either A, deposed leaders, or not necessarily sitting presidents or sitting leaders. And so there seems to be that double speak that's coming from the African Union.
When you look at the challenge the Kenyan cases has given to the ICC, serious reforms needs to be done in the ICC.
Okay.
The other cases were lukewarm cases. Those guys proceeded, they were convicted, and it was not really an issue. With the Kenyan cases, the ICC is going to come out stronger. The ICC is going to come up to be responsive to its members.
Okay.
And my prayer is more reforms to be taken at the ICC so that it complies with the rule of law.
I'm only disappointed that my colleague is not saying what reforms is expecting of the ICC. The first thing is that of all the African-related cases in the ICC, Charles Taylor, by the way, is a special tribunal, so it's not even part of that. It's like ICTR. But of all the cases, African cases before the ICC, it's only Kenya and Bashir,
Sudan.
The Darfur issue.
Yeah.
Those are the only ones that have come from an outsider kind of thing. That's the rest are self-referred.
Right.
This
was from
two,
the wacky envelope, and yes.
No. These two is either they call it in proprio motu, that is the prosecutor asking to be permitted to investigate, or for the purpose of, for the case of Sudan, it is the UN Security Council. All the other cases were self-referred by the African nations, the individual African nations.
Right.
Two, the African Union is not a member of the ICC. It's an observer. It holds observer status in the ASP and in terms of how it relates with the ICC. It is important for people to remember that even if there was a resolution or a recommendation from Addis Ababa that African nations withdraw from the ICC, that is really hot air. Individual nations in consideration of their personal interests will have to decide whether they want to withdraw, and if they withdraw, they have to write a letter. If Kenya has to withdraw, it has to write a letter to the Secretary General of the UN to say we shall be withdrawing within a year. They give a 1 year notice, and that is what happens. Thirdly, and the most important, is that such withdrawal in the case of Kenya today will not terminate the case of against Uhuru or Ruto or whoever. Even Uhuru can still be investigated.
Okay. All right. That is where we have to leave it at this point.
True. Except we did discuss about the role of the civil society and regards to Rule 68.
And you bring that up now when you're seated right next to one of the civil society
I expected him to defend that position because it doesn't augur well for the civil society that rule has been said. It is an illegality.
So
the
you
law
think
is the law.
Danston Omari, thank you very much. Harun Ndubi, as well as Elisha Ongoya, who joined us from our Kisumu office. Thanks very much for watching. I will be getting to your feedback right here on Checkpoint. Thanks, Elisha. for your comments tonight. I will be definitely getting
First,
to your
my regards
feedback.
to Elisha. I hope
Yes,
he's listening.
yes,
And wish
I can hear you. Salams have
Wish
been passed
everybody a
on.
good Valentine.
It's done now. Let's, yeah, all right, let's wind up this discussion.